Governor, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Oregon has seen big sustained protest over the last 12, 13 days, like the rest of the country. So, what do you think your role as governor is right now?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I want to say I am so grateful for all the protesters, not just here in Oregon, but across the entire country. Racism is a scourge on this nation, and we need to do everything we can to eliminate it. In my role as governor, in terms of police brutality, we're going to take a look at training, reformation, and of course, how can we hold our law enforcement officials accountable? But we can't stop there. We have to move on to eliminating racial injustices in our criminal justice system, in our healthcare system, and of course, in our education system. So I have about 2.5 years left on my term, and my commitment to Oregon and the rest of the country that I will dedicate it to eradicating racial injustices in this state.
Now, you mentioned some specific reforms there, and Portland's police chief we saw resigned on Monday after criticism over the way police there have been handling the protests. And I saw that she actually asked for a lieutenant who's a black man to replace her. So, what was your reaction when you saw that change?
Look, the law enforcement community has really tough jobs. I think my role as governor is to make sure that we eliminate the institutional racism in our training systems for law enforcement. And the state of Oregon has the oversight of that. This is going to be a co creation. We are going to have to put the voices of African American, Black, Brown, Latinx, Indigenous people at the center of that work as we create new systems for training our law enforcement. And frankly, look at examples around the world where law enforcement has better results and is able to ensure public safety, that entire communities are safe. And that's what we need to do here in this state and all across the country.
So, do you think the kind of reset that Portland police is going through is a good starting point for that?
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's not just about people. We obviously need to center the voices of African American, Black, Brown, and Indigenous people while we are doing this work. It's also about culture change, it's about systems change, it's about changing the laws, and it's about changing regulations. And that's going to take a collaborative, collective effort. And that's why I'm so proud to see so many voices across the country and, frankly, across the world raising their support to create a country and a world full of justice and equality for everyone.
So, speaking of training and reforming some of these policies that you mentioned, the Oregon ACLU said that the Portland PD's response to protesters has been excessively violent, and they're calling for an end to the use of tear gas and flashbangs by police. Is that something that you think the state of Oregon should ban?
Look, we are coming into special session sometime in the next few weeks. I expect that we will have at least one, if not multiple bills on the issue of police accountability, including making sure that we give the Attorney General the ability to review cases where law enforcement action has resulted in serious injury or death. I think we're going to be looking at the tools that our law enforcement community is using to stop the protesters. And I just think we really have to dig and figure out, look at the underlying systems that are creating this unjust and inequitable public law enforcement systems in this country and in this state.
So, nothing yet on sort of like the particular tactics, but it's something that you're looking at.
Absolutely. I honestly am going to do a lot of listening and learning over the next 30 days. The Oregon's legislature People of Color Caucus has called for 3 statutory changes. I'm going to be working with them and supporting them in that work. But to our protesters across the country and here in the state of Oregon, I want to encourage you to stand tall, to continue to fight, I want to encourage folks to turn that anger, that understandable anger and frustration, into action. It's going to take passing bills in the legislature. It's going to require us to change how we operate our law enforcement systems. And it's going to change, we're going to have to change people's hearts and minds. And that is work. And the reason why I am optimistic, it is work that we all need to do together. And we need to center the voices of our African American community, our Latinx community, and our Indigenous people around that particular work.
That's good to hear about the People of Color Caucus, and I know that we'll pay close attention to those reforms. Just one topic that we're seeing come up a lot, especially with our young audience, are calls to defund the police. And we know that in LA and New York, so far, that's resulted in city leaders saying that they are going to reduce budgets, at least. Minneapolis City Council said they're going to dismantle their police department and start over. Is that something that we might see in Oregon, or is there any talk of reducing the budget beyond what you may have had to do for the coronavirus crisis?
Look, what I think is really important is that elected leaders like me listen to people's concerns and take those concerns and reformulate and formulate, re-envision change. And I think that's what we can do working together. I know that law enforcement can look different. We can have better outcomes and ensure that our public feels safe. I think that is work that we all need to do together.
Now, just switching gears a little bit, before you were governor, you were Secretary of State, and you've become an expert on voting by mail for that reason, which is something that we're talking about nationwide because of the pandemic. So, what should people know about voting by mail?
Well, in Oregon, we've been voting by mail or voting at home for over 20 years statewide. We literally started the movement in the early 1980s with local ballot measure elections. And the Secretary of State at the time thought it was critically important that we go to a vote by mail system, a vote at home system, because she thought that it's critically important that every voter have the opportunity to have their voice be heard. And voting at home is the most convenient, most accessible, extremely secure, and in a time of COVID-19, most safe way to vote. And the good news is it's not hackable. We can easily do a recount and verify the results. One thing you may not know about me is I literally won my first election for the state house by 7 votes. And I was able to sit and watch the recount. Every volunteer, every person who helped me on that race says that they were the reason that I won the race, and they were. And I have to tell you, everyone who voted for me believes that they were the reason that I won the race. And that is exactly right. In Oregon, we believe that your vote is your voice, and every single voice matters.
That race certainly shows the importance of saying that every vote counts. Now, President Trump has been attacking vote by mail, though, and you mentioned that it's secure and not hackable. He's trying to say that it represents a type of voter fraud. So, what's your response to that?
Well, we have a number of systems in place, including verifying every signature to ensure that there is minimal, very limited amounts of fraud. Honestly, what I think is so ironic is that we have a president who literally votes at home through the mail, and he doesn't want other Americans, particularly people of color, particularly low-income families, particularly young people, to vote at home because he doesn't want to hear all of our voices. And I think it is time for us to fight back and empower Americans across the country to ensure that they can easily and accessibly exercise their most fundamental right to vote. It's the American way.
Is that a conversation that you're also having with other governors and state officials? Because it seems like he's attacked the Michigan governor, for example, and it seems like that's going to happen to a number of states this fall.
Absolutely. We're having conversations with governors of both red states and blue states because governors have been on the front lines of this COVID-19 crisis. We have been the ones who've had to figure out how we deliver testing and contact tracing, and of course, isolation to ensure the safety of our citizens. We've been the ones imposing stay-at-home orders so we can literally save lives. And what I'm really pleased to see is both Republican and Democratic governors embracing vote at home or vote by mail, because we all understand that it is critically important for our citizens to be able to exercise their fundamental right to vote and be able to do it safely.
Now, speaking of the current state of coronavirus in your state, I saw that Oregon had some spikes over the last 2 days, partly due to an outbreak at a seafood company is one of the reasons that I saw. And at the same time, you're getting some criticism for not reopening quickly enough. So how do you balance making these public health safety decisions with reopening the economy?
Well, it's for me pretty straightforward. We are using science and data here to make decisions. And I've been really fortunate. I have a medical advisory panel that's informing my decisions as well. And they are public health experts, they are epidemiologists, they are physicians who are on the front lines. And I really value their perspective. Here's what I would say. I took early and decisive actions here in Oregon. And I did that because I saw what was happening in the state of Washington and the state of California. And Oregonians made tremendous sacrifices in order to comply with these stay-at-home orders. The bottom line is, because we made these actions, we took these actions, we were able to deliver and send 140 ventilators to the state of New York. We knew that that community, that state needed those ventilators desperately. So we have been able to flatten the curve. We have 70,000 less infections and 1,500 fewer hospitalizations. So we have done the work here. In terms of reopening, I grew up in Minnesota. I am an ice skater. And as a kid, we used to strap on our skates and go out into the ponds that were frozen over. But we had to do it really, really carefully. And when the pond would be frozen, or at least we thought, we'd take a step. And if it didn't crack and we didn't fall through, we'd take another step, right? Only when we knew that the ice would hold us would we continue to move forward. And I see this reopening process just like that. We're going to take some step forward. And I hope we don't have to take too many steps backward. But if we do, we will. And we just have to do it incrementally, thoughtfully, and gradually. Our most important priority, my most important priority as governor, is the health and safety of Oregonians.
Now, the protests were kind of this unanticipated mass event. So are there now any contingency plans in place for dealing with possible spikes in infections because of these protests?
So I've been concerned about the folks protesting the stay-at-home orders, and I'm obviously concerned about the protesters who are out there fighting to eradicate systemic racism. What I would say is this: I want to encourage protesters to use their voices, but to do it safely, to make sure that you're wearing a face covering, that you're maintaining physical distance, that you're using hand sand, washing your hands frequently, and covering your coughs. So I think it's important that Americans, that Oregonians, have the incredible opportunity to exercise their right of free speech. I want to encourage folks to do it safely. And for those who are protesting racism in this country, I want to say I stand with you, I sing with you, and we can do this together, and your voices really do matter.
Would you issue a new stay-at-home order if you had to?
I am hoping with the new procedures that we have in place around testing, contact tracing, and isolation, that we can contain outbreaks. This has been a really good team effort to contain these outbreaks. And I just want to make sure that we reduce the spread of the disease and keep people safe and healthy. And we're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen.
Now, just as a final question, you made history as the first openly bisexual person elected governor in the United States. What was that experience like, and what is your message to people for Pride Month?
Well, happy Pride Month. I wish we could all be celebrating it together. I love going to the Pride parades here in Oregon, but that's not going to happen this year. And so I want to encourage folks to honor our history and to recommit to justice and equality. And I think it's so important that we continue to partner with our communities of color to work to eradicate racism. I think it's really key that the most successful movements have been movements where we have partnered together. In terms of my experiences for the LGBTQ youth out there, I see you, I hear you. I know it's really, really challenging. I just want to encourage you to be yourself, to be your full self, to continue to live in the world, and to reach out for help if you need it. There is help available. And I know that together we can build not only a better Oregon, but a better United States, and certainly a better world. I think it's so incredibly important that we work toward a world full of justice and equality for all.
Do you see an intersection there then between the anti-racism protests and movement that's going on and Pride Month and equality?
Absolutely, absolutely. As a child of the feminist movement, it's all interconnected. What I think in this day and age, at this time, what is key is that we put the voices of the African American community, our Black community, our Latinx community, our Indigenous people, that we center our work around these voices.
Governor, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right, you keep up the good work. Let's keep fighting.